The views expressed here on Now See Here are not necessarily those of the sponsors, advertisers, Jack Chris, the host, or Roddy Merritt. Hello, everybody. Jack Chris. This is the Now See Here podcast, where we tape professionally every Wednesday at CC's Coffee House, located in Ridgeland, Mississippi. Our good friend SettleMyCase.com is upstairs, and we are glad to have you join us. Remember, it's anchor.fm/Now See Here. Different type of show today. I'm pleased to welcome Miss Julie Whitehead as my guest. And you know, Julie, we were just talking. We've never met before, even though you're a freelance writer, you're well known, and you've written for me in the past.
Yes, sir.
And I think I've paid you for writing for me,
Yes,
but we've
sir.
never met face to face. So it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
We're going to discuss mental health. And we're going to discuss your writings in mental health. I'm going to let you describe what you do and who you've written for. But you yourself, you and I emailed back and forth before I booked you for the show, and you say you suffer from depression? Bipolar disorder. What is bipolar disorder for people who don't know?
Well, it's a case of you move from manic highs to depressive lows. And sometimes you can move through those stages of mood very quickly, and sometimes it's very slow cycle. Mine tends to move on a yearly cycle. I'll get an agitated depression in the spring. I'll be fairly stable through the summer. I'll make it through Christmas, and then I'll swing back down.
Is this something you've had all your life? When was this diagnosed?
I was diagnosed in 2006, but I look back and I probably started manifesting symptoms when I was around 8.
Do you know what general population numbers suffer from bipolar?
I think the latest figures are 1 to 3% of the population in America.
Which is a lot, still. Now, we see, I know you've seen, the commercials on television with all these new medications coming out, and they show people who are, you know, in this exhilarant mood one moment, and then at night they drop and they're sleeping or they can't function. I assume you're on a medication?
Yes, sir.
And how do they work for you? Did you have to go through a series of trial and error?
I did a good many medications, and sometimes they'll work for a while and they'll stop. The main medication I've been on that's been the most helpful to me is Abilify. It's a mood stabilizer. And the last time I had a serious depression was when my insurance company, who shall not be named, decided they were not going to pay for it. And they wanted me to pay out of pocket about $1,000 a month.
What did you do?
We switched to a less expensive medication, and 6 months later I was inpatient in the hospital for suicidal thinking.
You know, obviously you're not shy about discussing this, and you write about it. And
Yes, sir.
Tell us, who do you write for? I know you contribute regularly, and you told me, but I'd like for you to tell our listeners and audience.
All right. Well, I'm currently writing for the Mississippi Center of Investigative Reporting, which is a nonprofit news organization, and it gathers information on various topics, prison reform, education reform, civil rights cases, that sort of material, but they wanted to do a series of stories on mental health because of the recent lawsuit against the state of Mississippi for how they provide mental health to their citizens. So I've done several stories for them in that. I write a blog that's www.julielwhitehead.wordpress.com, and I've been doing that since 2014, September 2014. And I also write for a Canadian blog called www.defyingshadows.com.
How did you get in touch with the Canadian people?
I joined several Christian blogger networks, and they put out a call for guest bloggers, and I volunteered.
Julie, is the stigma still there for people with bipolar or any type of, I hate to use the term mental illness, because I wonder if it still connotes to some people that, oh, they're crazy, or I can't deal with someone who's got this problem, but it's a disease.
It is.
It's a biochemical disorder.
It is, and it's certainly appropriate to make that reference because most of the community wants it treated as a disease on par with physical disorders. We went for a long time where it was criminalized. We went for a long time where it was heavily stigmatized. But now we're moving more towards a treatment and recovery perception, and that's what I think is best, is to recognize that it is a disorder, recognize that it is a disease, that it often does require medical intervention, and that there's no shame in that.
Is that the biggest misconception you think the general population has? And even after all these years, we're in 2019, is the misconception that it is a disease, it's not a personality problem that you can just shake off if you work hard enough at it?
Right.
Or cheer up, you know?
Right. That thought is still prevalent, I hate to say, and you'll run into it in the strangest places. I mean, I've had different people say different things to me, but I think the most startling was one girl told me, said, "I just don't see how you can have Jesus in your heart and be depressed."
Well,
yes.
And how did you respond to that?
We were in a group setting, and she didn't say it to my face. It was after I had just shared about my difficulties, and I thought, I'm not going to say anything else in this conversation. I'm going to move on. And so we did.
But Julie, how a lot of people, let's face it, you and I run into a lot of people, we talk to a lot of people, friends, coworkers. A lot of folks are anxious. A lot of folks are depressed.
Yes.
And they'll self-medicate. They'll drink themselves or do whatever they take. When did you realize, I've got to go get medical help for this? And when should people be concerned about their own well-being?
Well, I had kind of a tortured path to getting help. I had had depressions, and I wound up in, I believe it was 96. I had a postpartum depression after I had my first child. And I got counseling and help through my medical doctor for my difficulty at that point. But I came out of it, and that's the nature of the disorder. You go up and you go down, and you go up and you go down. Well, I started on an upswing, and I stopped counseling, and my doctor said, well, you seem to be fine, and we terminated treatment. Then I went my longest without any psychiatric treatment after I had my second child. I went off my psychotropics to get pregnant, and then had my second child and had a extremely productive time. After that, I look back, and that was a little bit of mania involved with that. That was when I started my freelance career. That's when I was turning in a story somewhere in the world every day.
Probably when you were working with me.
Right,
yeah,
around that time.
Yeah.
And I thought I was doing great. I didn't think there were any problems at all. And then in 2006, a series of events came about and sent me into a very deep depression. And the top off to that was Hurricane Katrina. That was late in 2006.
Were you here at the time?
2005, right. Late 2005. That was the top off, and I crashed. And I couldn't get myself out of it.
When you say crashed, how did that manifest itself? Do you mind sharing that with us?
That's right. Mentally, I was in a very dark place. I was still writing, doing the freelance work, but the desire wasn't there anymore. I kept going because that's what I did. That was my identity. I was a writer.
And your joy.
Yes, sir, it was. And finally, I just got to a point where I couldn't function anymore. I would lay down on a hardwood floor with my child, playing with her, and fall asleep. That's how deeply depressed I was that I would just fall asleep and not want to wake up, is ultimately what started happening.
And so you got on new medication or went and
Yes,
saw your
sir.
physician. And Julie, was there a history of this in your family that you know of? Because I know that's the first thing most doctors or mental professionals ask.
Well, there wasn't one that I knew of at the time. Now, I knew I had 3 aunts in my dad's family, 3 of his sisters, who suffered from regular unipolar depression. And then we had, as I found out through the years since my diagnosis, there have been a number of suicides in my mother's family, even back to my great-grandmother's generation, when this was certainly not talked about and certainly not treated.
Did you ever get to that point?
Yes, I did. That's what occasioned my first hospitalization and my second.
And Was that when you couldn't get up, when you just were at rock
When I
bottom?
couldn't
And
do anymore. Actually, my second hospitalization, I ran away from home. I packed up my bags in the middle of the night and drove
Just
down
left.
to Covington, Louisiana.
Why Covington? That's
I-
Walker Percy lived there, you know?
It was a choice between going north to Grenada or south to New Orleans, and I picked south at 2 a.m. in the morning, May 2006.
And when did you come back and how?
Actually, the police caught up with me. My husband, of course, called the police when I turned up missing that morning. And long story short, they caught up with me. I was committed in Louisiana for 3 days, and then I came back and went back to hospital in Mississippi for another 7 days. And
I don't mean to
came out of
press.
it.
You know, I don't want you to talk about anything you don't want to talk about.
Right.
But I do think people need to hear your story.
Yes, sir.
But you made it. I mean, you're here.
Yes, sir.
You're
I
alive.
did. Yes, sir. And it was a very near thing too.
Do you today, I mean, is it a fight? Do you feel like you're fighting every day? Are you tense? Or can you relax and go through any given day or week and feel relatively at peace with yourself?
Yes. At this point, yes. That's the thing that I have to keep emphasizing is right this moment I'm doing fairly well.
But it could change at any time?
Yes, sir.
That's the nature of and your doctors have told you that.
Yes, sir.
You don't think it would ever get as bad as it did in 2005 or 6, do you?
I don't think so. The last time I was hospitalized was 2017, I believe.
And your
That's
friend,
the last time I was hospitalized.
your friends and family, how do they, I mean, is it hard, the relationship? Do you think they treat you differently, or have they learned over the years?
My parents, I think at first, what we used to think was all psychiatric disorders started with the parents, and
Right.
they blamed themselves. But they came out of that as I talked more about it and educated them more about what was going on. My children were old enough to know me before and after, except for my very youngest. She's never known any other reality besides the one she's in. But my older ones could see a difference between me then and me now. And they don't like talking about it.
Most people don't.
No.
That's the
And-
stigma.
And I've told them, anytime you ask me a question, anytime you feel anything odd, come to me and talk to me. And so we've gone through that with them, and I've got 15 books on it. That's my recourse is to get whenever something like this goes on, or whenever I hear something that I want to be interested in, I go find a book on it. I've told them pick up one of my books and read about it because it may be you one day.
That you've written.
No, that I've read.
That you've read, I'm sorry.
Right. I've read. I bought out Borders bookstore
Yeah.
of their books on bipolar disorder, and just the idea that they need to be educated, the world needs to be educated, but especially someone with the history in the family need to be educated on this.
This is the Now See Here podcast, also on YouTube. I'm Jack Chris, your host, and we're talking to Miss Julie Whitehead, who is a writer, and her specialty, I guess we could say, is discussing mental illness and writing
Yes.
about mental illness. Let's talk about men for a minute, because I think there's another stereotype that, women, right, they get the postpartum depression, and women are more, they tend toward that, but that's not true. I mean, I've had anxiety attacks, terrible panic attacks before that have been almost debilitating. And in talking to my male friends, they'll open up to me and say, yeah, sometimes in the middle of the night, I feel like I'm having a heart attack, or I get depressed. But it's still, especially in the South, in Mississippi, men aren't supposed to talk about that.
Right.
Are you running into that? Have you heard from male readers?
I have. I ran a short-lived blog called 46 Reasons Why Not. And the idea was to counter the HBO, I believe, documentary on 13 Reasons Why about suicide. And I felt like this was a story that needed to get out, was that people needed to see reasons to live. And I called it 46 Reasons Why Not because at the time that's how old I was. I came up with a reason
Right.
for every year of my life. I would post one of those a day, and I solicited a lot of guys that I knew that had mental issues to write about, and I only got a positive response from one. I think I talked to 4 or 5 men that I knew, and one was very blunt about it. He said, "My employer doesn't know, and I don't want him to find out."
Well, because there could be a reason to fire him, not on
Right,
that ground.
repercussions,
Right. I mean,
yes.
that's illegal, I assume.
Right.
But there could be another reason.
Right.
You know.
The Americans with Disabilities Act does protect mental illness.
But you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Another reason could be given, and that person's out the door because they're afraid. And do you think people are afraid once they find out you have bipolar? Do they do you sense a fear or?
I'm very upfront that I'm only a danger to myself.
And I don't mean danger. I mean, I think there are some people who, when they see others with physical disabilities, they tend to maybe treat them differently. I
Right.
don't. I mean, unless I can help them in some way, but they feel uncomfortable or they feel like, oh, that poor person, they pity them. But you don't want pity, do you?
No, I want understanding. I want people to understand why this happens, and I want people to understand that it's not a case of wanting attention or wanting anything from somebody. It's just it happens.
It happens.
It happened to me. It crashed on me. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but if it has to happen, then I need to do something useful with that. And that's why I'm so into education and
writing.
spreading awareness and writing.
Well,
Yes,
Julie, the question's begged, since you are a writer and you contribute regularly and you have your own blog, when is a book going to come?
well,
You could write one. I mean,
right. I'm working on my MFA at the moment through the Mississippi University for Women.
Good.
And I'm going to write my bipolar story as my thesis.
And maybe perhaps convert that into a book
Yes, sir.
at some point.
Yes, sir. That's
And
the plan.
You do have support groups here in Central Mississippi.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
right?
NAMI is one National Alliance for Mental Illness. There's the regional mental health centers that do as good as a job as they can with the funding they get.
That's Region 8, right?
Region 8 is
yeah.
the one in Brandon. There's Hines Behavioral Health, which is the one for Hines County. They're scattered all over the state. Almost every county has a regional mental health center in it.
Because therapy is expensive. You're
It
looking
is.
at $150 to $200 an hour, probably,
sir.
or a session. Is there any recourse to people who and I would imagine depression and anxiety probably affects poor people because they've already got the burden of economic distress adding to their problems. Is there any recourse or any way? Will their insurance cover psychiatric or psychological visits?
It does. Insurance in Mississippi, I spoke with Mike Cheney about this the other day.
You spoke with him?
I did.
Good.
He said that parity is required in companies that operate in the state of Mississippi. They cannot be more restrictive with their mental health benefits than they are with their physical benefits. So insurance does pay at times for these. And the mental health centers operate on a sliding scale. Fees, they take your income into account. A lot of faith communities also offer therapy. There's Summit Counseling at First Baptist Jackson. There's Solomon Counseling Center at Catholic Charities. St. Mark's United Methodist Church in Flowood has a on-staff counselor. There's many, many recourses.
There are resources out there. And I would imagine young people today, I mean, I'm not going to blame social media, but they are, when we were growing up, we had bullies. Now these kids can get on Facebook and tweet and text and bully kids without the child even knowing it,
Right.
to their face. And I'm sure if a child already suffers from some type of malady, that only exacerbates it. Have you worked with children, or do you hear from or young adults, I guess I should say?
Well, actually, the schools are a good recourse for someone whose child is having difficulties. Region 8 is piloting a program at the moment where they have counselors at the 28 schools in the Rankin County School District. And they're hoping to spread that at least through their region, which covers 6 counties. and hopefully can make it a pilot program for the state, make it a pattern for the state to have counselors on staff at schools.
Well, if you're talking to Mike Cheney and people like that, it sounds like you're taking the political bull by the horn, which is good. I mean, do you intend to talk to the next governor, or are you going to talk to your state representative or senator?
Depends on what they have to say.
Yeah.
Depends on who it is. I know Attorney General Jim Hood has put together a task force on mental health. I think it's up. At the time when he founded it, he had 31 members. I think that's gone up, and they're trying to study the system and how they can comply with the law, with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and comply with just the various laws that are on the books as far as funding, as far as seeking community-based services over institutional services, and issues along those lines.
You know, Julie, we're out of time, but I think you're to be commended. I think it takes bravery and courage to do what you do and to tell people your story. Give out websites again or information if people want to read about your experiences or keep up with you with your blog you're doing. Mm-hmm. How can they keep up with you?
My blog is www.julielwhitehead.wordpress.com, and you can talk with me there, leave messages for me there. I'm on Twitter. It's at JulielWhitehead #1.
Still open to any writing assignments if I get the itch and need somebody to write something for me?
We'll see.
If the pay's right. It's tough.
Really, that's not as important as it used to be.
Well, print is not what it used to be.
As well.
We could make a good living, but now we're doing podcasts. So, But Julie, it's so good to finally meet you in person. And again, good luck.
Yes, sir.
And we'll have you on again to keep up with your progress.
All right.
Miss Julie Whitehead has been my guest. I'm Jack Chris. This is the Now See Here podcast from CC's Coffee House in Ridgeland. Folks, thanks so much for your support. Thanks for listening. Take care.